The heat never leaves you. That's the first thing they should tell you when they assign you to a Hellhound crew. But they don't. They tell you about the honor of serving the Emperor in one of his most devastating weapons, about the glory of purging the heretic and the Xenos with holy fire, about how the Hellhound is the Imperium's answer to entrenched enemies and fortified positions. They tell you about duty and sacrifice and the long tradition of armored warfare in the Astra Militarum. They don't tell you about the heat. They don't tell you that 6 months after your first deployment, you'll wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat that isn't there, feeling flames licking at your skin from fires that haven't burned in weeks. They don't tell you that you'll spend the rest of your life, however long that is, carrying a furnace inside your chest that never cools, never dims, never grants you a moment of relief. I've been off active duty for 3 years now, reassigned to Training Depot 447 Sigma on a frozen moon whose name I can barely pronounce, where the temperature outside drops to -40 during the long winter nights. The cold should be a blessing, should be a relief after what I experienced, but I don't feel it. I walk outside in my duty uniform while trainees bundle themselves in thermal gear, and I feel nothing but a vague absence of heat, like the difference between standing in sunlight and standing in shade. The cold doesn't touch me anymore. Can't touch me. Whatever I became during my time crewing Salamander 7-9, whatever the heat made me, it burned away my capacity to feel anything else. They assigned me to the Hellhound on my second tour of duty. I had survived my first deployment as a standard guardsman in the 443rd Cadian Pattern Regiment, had earned my combat classification, and proven I could follow orders under fire without freezing or breaking. That was enough, apparently, to qualify me for armored service. I remember reporting to the motor pool on Garrison World Tarsus, remember seeing the Hellhounds lined up in their maintenance bays, remember thinking they looked like predatory animals crouching in the shadows. They were smaller than I'd expected, more compact than the Lemon Russ battle tanks I'd seen during training, sleeker, purpose-built for a single function. With none of the multi-role flexibility of standard armor, Salamander 7-9 was third from the left. I didn't know her name yet, didn't know that the crews personalized their vehicles with titles and decorations that the commissariat tolerated as long as they didn't border on heresy. She looked standard to me then, Imperial green armor plating scorched black in places from backwash, the distinctive promethium tanks mounted on her flanks, the inferno cannon protruding from her turret like an accusatory finger. I couldn't see the interior modifications yet, couldn't see the heat scoring on the metal surfaces, or the improvised cooling systems, or the prayer strips plastered over every available surface, each one begging the Emperor for protection from the flames we carried. My commander was a woman named Sergeant Cassria Venn, a 20-year veteran who had crewed Hellhounds on 4 different worlds. She was tall and thin in a way that looked unhealthy, like something had burned away all the excess flesh from her frame, leaving only wire and sinew. Her skin had a strange quality to it, tight and shiny in places, marked with old burns that had healed into patterns that almost looked deliberate. When she shook my hand in greeting, her palm was hot, feverish, though she showed no other signs of illness. "You'll be my gunner," she said, her voice rough like gravel scraping metal. Previous one caught around through the vision slit during the Talassar campaign. Clean kill. Didn't suffer. You're lucky in that regard. Dying quick is a blessing in this machine. The alternative is worse. She didn't elaborate on what that alternative was, and I didn't ask. I was young enough then to think I understood what she meant, to assume she was talking about the standard risks of armored warfare. I didn't understand yet that the Hellhound had its own specific horrors, its own unique ways of destroying the people who crewed it. The third crew member was our driver, a man named Petrock, who had served with Sergeant Venn for 8 years. He barely spoke, communicated mostly in grunts and nods, and spent his off-duty time sitting as close to refrigeration units as regulations allowed. His hands were scarred from knuckles to wrists, the skin thick and leathery, and I noticed he never ate hot food in the mess, only rations that had been chilled to near freezing. When I asked him about it, He looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold no moisture, dry and red-rimmed, like he'd been staring into fire too long. "You'll understand soon enough," was all he said. Our first deployment came 3 days later. The Talasar rebellion had been suppressed, but elements of the heretic forces remained in the industrial sectors of Hive Tertius, holed up in manufacturum complexes that our standard infantry couldn't clear without unacceptable casualties. The Hellhounds were called in to do what we did best, burn them out. I remember climbing into Salamander 7-9 that first morning, remember descending through the top hatch into the crew compartment, remember the immediate hit of heat that washed over me like stepping too close to a forge. The interior was cramped, every surface covered with equipment and ammunition, and the 1,000 necessary components that kept the vehicle functional. The promethium fuel lines ran along the bulkheads like veins, and I could feel the heat radiating from them even though they weren't actively pumping. The gunner's position was directly behind the inferno cannon, surrounded by firing controls and targeting optics and coolant reservoirs that were supposed to keep the weapon from overheating during sustained fire. I strapped myself in, adjusted the vision blocks to get a clear view forward, and tried to ignore the sweat already beading on my forehead. "Seal up," Sergeant Venn ordered from the commander's position. The hatches clanged shut, and suddenly the heat intensified, became oppressive, became inescapable. There was no ventilation system, or if there was, it had failed long ago and never been replaced. The air tasted of promethium fumes and recycled breath, and something else, something chemical and wrong that made my throat itch. "This is standard," Venn continued, her voice calm through the internal vox. "The heat is part of the job. You'll adjust." They all adjust, or they don't last long enough for it to matter. We rolled out as part of a column, 6 Hellhounds and a command chimera, threading through the Hive's upper levels toward the industrial sectors. I watched the city pass through my vision blocks, massive Gothic architecture blackened by centuries of soot, hab blocks stacked on top of each other like prayer cards in a shrine, civilians pressing themselves against walls as we passed, their faces blank with the particular numbness that came from living under constant threat of violence. The temperature inside Salamander 7-9 continued to rise as we moved, as the engine heated up, as the promethium tanks absorbed warmth from the surrounding metal. I could feel sweat running down my back, soaking into my uniform, and I hadn't even fired a shot yet. The contact came in the middle of the morning, in a plaza surrounded by manufactorum buildings. The heretics opened fire from second-story windows and rooftop positions, las rounds and stubber fire pinging off our armor. Sergeant Venn's voice came through the vox, calm and measured. "Gunner, target building 3 o'clock, second-floor windows. Full spread. Burn it clean." "You ever?" Came joy to defested. I acquired the target, adjusted the firing arc, and squeezed the trigger. The inferno cannon roared, and I felt the backwash of heat slam into the crew compartment like a physical blow. Superheated air expanded in the confined space, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only experience the sensation of being inside an oven as it reached critical temperature. Through the vision blocks, I watched the promethium stream arc across the plaza, watched it splash against the building's facade, watched the flames spread with terrible hunger. The heretics in the windows started screaming. Some jumped, their bodies trailing fire. Others simply vanished into the inferno. "Good kill," Venn said. "Next target, building 9 o'clock. Same treatment." We spent 4 hours in that plaza, systematically burning out every structure the heretics had fortified. Each shot from the inferno cannon raised the interior temperature further. The metal surfaces became too hot to touch. The ammunition magazines were cooking, promethium expanding in their sealed containers. Dangerous, but not yet critical. My uniform was soaked through completely, and I started to develop a headache from dehydration despite the water rations I was drinking. Petrok was driving on instinct, his responses to Venn's commands, mechanical, automatic. None of us spoke except to relay tactical information. There was nothing to say. We were doing our job, performing our function, burning the Emperor's enemies as we had been trained and equipped to do. But even then, during that first mission, I started to notice something wrong. The heat wasn't just external. It wasn't just the environmental consequence of operating a flamer tank in combat. There was something else, something deeper, like the flames were getting inside me, seeping through my skin, taking root in my bones. I felt feverish, my thoughts slow and thick, and when I looked at my hands between firing sequences, I could swear I saw steam rising from my skin. "Is it supposed to be this hot?" I asked through the vox, my voice cracking. "Yes," Ven replied simply. "Welcome to the Hellhound Corps, trooper. The heat is always this bad, sometimes worse." After we secured the plaza, we pulled back to a support position while infantry moved in to finish the clearance operation. Ven ordered us to crack the hatches, and I practically threw myself at the release mechanism, desperate for fresh air, for anything that wasn't the suffocating heat of the crew compartment. But when the hatch opened and I pulled myself halfway out, gulping at the air, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The air outside felt cold. Hive Tertius was a tropical world. The ambient temperature in the city was easily 35 degrees. But to me, after 4 hours inside Salamander 7-9, it felt like I was standing in a freezer. I saw Petroc climb out of the driver's hatch, saw him shivering despite the heat, saw him wrap his arms around himself like a man standing in a blizzard. Ven remained in her position, didn't even bother to crack her hatch, and when I looked down at her through the commander's cupola, I saw her eyes were closed, her face tilted back, and she was smiling. Actually smiling, like she was enjoying the residual heat, basking in it like some people basked in sunlight. That was when I first understood that something was deeply wrong with the Hellhound crews. That we weren't like other tankers, weren't like the Lemon Russ commanders who could joke and smoke low sticks between engagements, who could dismount and stretch and complain about the standard discomforts of armored service. We were different, changed. And the change wasn't something that happened over years of service. It happened fast, faster than anyone admitted, faster than I could have imagined possible. We ran 14 more missions over the next 3 weeks, burning out heretic positions throughout Hive Tertius. Each deployment followed the same pattern. Seal up, roll out, engage targets, endure the heat, return to base, feeling like something essential had been cooked out of us. I started losing weight despite eating double rations, my body consuming itself, trying to cope with the constant thermal stress. My skin developed a permanent flush, red and irritated, and no amount of water seemed sufficient to keep me hydrated. I began to crave salt, would steal packets from the mess hall and pour them directly into my mouth, trying to replace what I sweated out during missions. But worse than the physical changes were the psychological ones. I stopped being able to sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flames, heard the screaming of people burning, felt the heat slamming into my face. I would wake up gasping, convinced I was still in the crew compartment, still firing the inferno cannon, still watching human shapes writhe and blacken in the promethium flames. The other Hellhound crews in our company were the same, I noticed. We moved through the base like ghosts, quiet and withdrawn, avoiding the standard infantry and the other armored units. We congregated near the vehicle bays, near our tanks, as if being close to them provided some kind of comfort, even when we weren't deployed. It was during the 3rd week that I started to understand why. The heat never left us. That's what I said at the beginning, and it's the literal truth. Even when we weren't in the tanks, even when we were back at base sleeping in our bunks, we carried the heat with us. Our core body temperatures had risen, I realized. Not enough to kill us, not enough to trigger medical alarms if we were examined, but enough to fundamentally alter how we experienced the world. Room temperature felt cold. Cool water felt icy. The mess hall, kept at a comfortable 20 degrees for the standard troops, made me shiver until I couldn't stand to be in there more than necessary. I went to the company Medicae, thinking something was wrong with me, thinking I had developed some kind of illness. The orderly took my temperature, frowned at the reading, took it again, 38.4 degrees. Technically a fever, but I showed no other symptoms. He gave me some basic antipyretics and told me to come back if it got worse. The medication did nothing. My temperature remained elevated, and I continued to feel cold in conditions that should have been comfortable. "It's normal," Sergeant Venn told me when I mentioned it to her. "Your body is adapting to the work. The Hellhound changes you. That's the price of crewing a flamer tank. You become part of the fire. Your physiology shifts to accommodate the constant heat exposure. The Mechanicus has documented it, though they don't share those studies with the crews. They've concluded it's an acceptable side effect, that the benefits of having soldiers who can tolerate the thermal conditions inside a Hellhound outweigh the complications." "What complications?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Venn pulled up her sleeve, revealing her forearm. The skin was covered in burn scars, but they weren't random. They formed patterns, almost like brands, like someone had deliberately marked her flesh with heated metal. "These aren't from combat," she said. "These are from touching normal objects, door handles, metal tools, water from the tap. After a while, everything becomes hot to you. Your nervous system gets confused, interprets all stimuli as heat, and your skin becomes more susceptible to burning because it's been damaged so many times, healed so many times, that it loses its ability to protect itself properly." "Emperor's mercy," I whispered. "There is no mercy," Venn replied flatly. "There's only service. You crew a Hellhound for as long as you can stand it, and then you either die in combat, or you get reassigned to somewhere they think you might still be useful despite being fundamentally broken. Most of us prefer to die in combat. It's cleaner." I wanted to request a transfer, to tell them I couldn't continue, that I wasn't prepared for what the assignment was doing to me. But transfers out of Hellhound crews were rare to the point of non-existent. We were specialized, trained in systems that most tankers never dealt with, and the attrition rate was high enough that the Departamento Militarum couldn't afford to lose personnel who were already qualified. Besides, I had seen what happened to crew members who tried to refuse duty. The commissariat took a very dim view of such things. Better to endure, to persist, to hope that a clean death would come before the complications Venn had mentioned became unbearable. Our deployment to Hive Tertius ended after 6 weeks. We were rotated back to the garrison world for refit and replenishment, and I thought I might finally get some relief, might have time to recover from the constant thermal stress. But the garrison world was colder than Hive Tertius, a temperate planet where autumn was just beginning, and I found myself unable to function in the chill air. I requisitioned extra layers, wore my duty coat even indoors, and spent my off hours in the vehicle bay, where the Hellhounds radiated residual heat from their idling engines. That's where I discovered the others like me. Dozens of Hellhound crew members, from different companies, different regiments, all congregating in the warmth of the motor pool. Some of them had been crewing flamers for years, and I could see the progression written on their bodies, the burn scars forming intricate patterns, the way their skin had taken on a leathery quality, the hollow look in their eyes that suggested they were seeing something beyond normal perception. One of them, an old veteran named Rask, who had survived 7 major campaigns, could hold his hand directly over a heating element without flinching. When I asked him how, he laughed. "I don't feel it anymore," he said. "Not the way you do. The nerves are damaged beyond repair. Everything is just warm, all the time, warm and comfortable. And I know that should terrify me, know that it means I'm fundamentally broken, but I can't make myself care. The heat is all I have left, all I am." I looked at his hands and saw they were covered in scars that went down to the bone in places, saw that several of his fingers were missing parts, like they'd been burned away bit by bit. He caught my expression and shrugged. "Happens to all of us eventually. The flesh can't take the constant exposure. It breaks down. But as long as I can still pull a trigger, as long as I can still crew a Hellhound, they'll keep using me. That's all that matters." I wanted to run, wanted to desert, to disappear into the civilian population, to find somewhere cold and clean where I could try to become human again. But there was nowhere to run. The Imperium didn't let its soldiers simply leave. And even if I could escape, even if I could hide somewhere beyond the reach of the commissariat and the Arbeits, I was beginning to suspect that the damage was already permanent. That whatever I had become during those weeks inside Salamander 7-9 couldn't be reversed, couldn't be healed, could only be managed until it finally killed me. We deployed again 2 months later, this time to a forge world that had been compromised by a Genestealer cult uprising. The cult had infiltrated the manufactorums and turned entire districts into breeding grounds for their Xenos corruption. The solution, as always, was fire. We spent 3 months on that world, burning hives and factory complexes and residential blocks that had been deemed beyond redemption. The air was toxic from the promethium smoke, black clouds hanging over the cities like funeral shrouds, and the heat was constant, oppressive, inescapable even outside the tanks. I should have hated it, should have been desperate to leave, but instead I found myself feeling almost comfortable there, as if the external heat validated the internal furnace I carried. When we weren't on active deployment, when we were pulled back to staging areas, I felt cold despite the temperatures that had the standard infantry complaining about heat exhaustion. My body had adjusted to operating in conditions that would have killed the person I had been 6 months ago, and now anything less felt wrong, felt like deprivation. Petrock stopped speaking entirely during that campaign. He drove with mechanical precision, followed orders without acknowledgement, and when we pulled back to base, he would sit in the driver's compartment for hours, unmoving, as if he preferred being inside the tank to existing in the external world. Ven told me not to worry about it, that it was normal, that drivers tended to lose themselves first because they had the least to focus on during engagements. The gunner has targets, she explained. The commander has tactical decisions, but the driver just drives, just experiences the heat without the distraction of combat. It gets inside them faster, changes them more completely. Give it another month, and he won't acknowledge you at all, won't respond to anything except tactical commands. It's not madness, not exactly. It's more like evolution, like he's becoming something else, something that doesn't need human interaction anymore. And us? I asked. Are we becoming that too? Ven smiled, that same unsettling smile I'd seen during our first deployment. We already have, you just haven't noticed yet. She was right. I could feel it happening, could feel my personality fragmenting, could feel the parts of me that cared about things beyond the immediate mission fading away like morning frost under sunlight. I stopped writing letters to anyone, stopped caring about pay or promotion or anything beyond the next deployment. My world had narrowed to simple binary states, hot and cold, burning and not burning, enemy and target. Everything else was irrelevant, incomprehensible, like trying to remember a language I had once spoken but could no longer parse. The mission on the Forge World culminated in a final assault on the cult's central breeding nest, a massive complex deep in the planet's lower hive levels. They sent in 20 Hellhounds, a full-strength flamer company, with orders to burn everything. No survivors, no mercy. Complete sterilization through fire. We descended into the depths on tracked transport vehicles, rolled through tunnels carved from living rock, passed through chambers so vast their ceilings disappeared into darkness above our lights. When we reached the nest, when we saw what the Genestealers had created there, I understood why the fire was necessary. The walls were lined with organic matter, pulsing and wet, covered in structures that might have been eggs or might have been something worse. The air was thick with pheromones and the stench of alien biology. And the cult members, human once, but transformed by the Genestealer kiss into something hybrid. Something wrong. They rushed at us by the hundreds, by the thousands, screaming in voices that held no human cadence. We burned them all, filled those vast chambers with promethium, and watched the flames climb the walls, watched the organic structures blacken and burst, watched the hybrids writhe and die in agony that I could hear through Salamander 7-9's armor plating. The heat inside the crew compartment reached levels I hadn't thought possible. The metal surfaces glowed red in places. Ammunition was cooking off in storage. Controlled detonations that the tank systems could barely manage. My skin was blistering where it pressed against my uniform, and I could smell something burning that I realized was my own hair. But I didn't stop firing. None of us stopped. We emptied our promethium tanks, reloaded from the supply vehicles, emptied them again. We burned for 6 hours straight, until the nest was nothing but ash and melted stone and the charred remnants of Xenos corruption. And when we finally pulled back, when Sergeant Venn ordered us to seal the tanks and retreat to the surface, I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead felt like a revelation. I had enjoyed it. Not the killing itself, not the destruction, but the heat. The pure, clean heat of the flames, the way it had filled the crew compartment, the way it had made me feel alive in a way nothing else did anymore. "You understand now," Venn said through the Vox, her voice oddly gentle. "You understand what we are. Not soldiers, not crew members. We're priests of a kind, servants of fire, and the fire changes us because that's what it does. It consumes, it transforms, it purifies. We carry it with us, let it burn through us, let it make us into tools capable of wielding it. And in return, it gives us purpose, clarity, freedom from everything except the simple truth of flame." I didn't argue. Couldn't argue. Because she was right. The heat had burned away everything non-essential, leaving only the core of function and duty. I was no longer the person who had reported to the motor pool on Garrison World Tarsus. That person was gone, consumed, transformed into something else. Something that could endure the interior of a Hellhound, that could operate the inferno cannon without hesitation, that could watch people burn and feel nothing except satisfaction at a job well done. After the Forge world, we were rotated through 2 more campaigns. A jungle world, where we burned rebel strongholds hidden in the dense vegetation. An ice world where we melted through fortifications that the standard infantry couldn't breach. Each deployment reinforced the changes, made them more permanent, more profound. My core temperature stabilized at 39 degrees. My skin developed the same leathery quality I'd seen on Venn and the older veterans. I stopped sweating entirely, my body's cooling mechanisms simply giving up under the constant thermal assault. And I stopped caring. That was the worst part. Or perhaps the best part, I wasn't sure anymore. The psychological distance between me and normal humanity grew until it became a gulf I couldn't cross even if I wanted to. I watched standard infantry troops talking and laughing in the mess hall and felt nothing, no connection, no recognition. They were cold, I thought. Cold and fragile and temporary. While I was warm. Always warm. Permanent in a way they could never understand. Petrock died during our 3rd year together. Not in combat, but in his sleep. His heart simply stopped, cooked beyond its capacity to function by the sustained thermal stress. They found him in the driver's compartment where he'd been sleeping, curled around the engine compartment's access panel, like a child seeking warmth. The medical examiner's report noted his core temperature at the time of death had been 41 degrees, enough to cause permanent organ damage in normal humans. But he hadn't been normal for a long time. None of us were. His replacement lasted 2 weeks before requesting transfer. The request was denied, and he lasted another month before he put a lasgun under his chin and pulled the trigger. Some people couldn't adapt, couldn't accept the transformation. They broke differently than we did, fractured along lines that led to death rather than evolution. I didn't judge them for it. The heat wasn't for everyone. Venn disappeared during our 4th year. We were on deployment to a death world where chaos cultists had established a ritual site, and during one of the engagements, her hatch opened and she climbed out while we were still in combat. I watched through my vision blocks as she walked into the flames we'd started, walked directly into the burning structure, and simply stood there, burning, not screaming, not moving, just standing in the fire like she was going home. They recovered her body later, or what was left of it. The chaplain said some words about duty and sacrifice. I felt nothing except a vague sense of recognition. She had found her ending. Her transformation had completed. She was fire now, truly and completely. I became commander after that, inherited Salamander 7-9 and her new crew, 2 replacements who didn't understand yet what they were becoming, who still thought the heat was just a challenging working condition rather than a fundamental transformation. I watched them change over the months, watched the same progression I'd experienced reflected in their bodies and their behaviors, watched them stop talking, stop caring, stop being anything except weapons designed to carry fire. And I understood that this was the real horror of the Hellhound, not the burning of enemies, not the destruction we caused, but what it did to us, the crews who operated these machines. We were sacrifices just as much as the people we burned, offered up to the fire in a different way. The Imperium needed its flamers, needed weapons that could purge corruption and xenos and heresy with absolute finality. And to crew those weapons, it needed people who could endure conditions that would kill normal humans. So, it created us, changed us, broke us in specific, calculated ways, until we became tools capable of wielding fire without dying immediately. But dying slowly was acceptable. Dying over years was acceptable. Dying piece by piece, physically and psychologically, was acceptable. As long as we kept burning the Emperor's enemies, the cost was justified. The Departamento Militarum's actuaries had done the math, had calculated that a Hellhound crew could typically function for 3 to 5 years before the accumulated damage made them unsuitable for service. That was longer than many infantry regiments lasted. The investment was sound. I've been off active duty for 3 years now. As I said at the beginning, my final deployment was to a shrine world where heretics had desecrated a major cathedral complex. We burned it all, the heretics and the cathedral both, because the corruption was too deep to salvage. During that operation, I suffered what the Medicae called catastrophic thermal damage. When the crew compartment's cooling system finally failed completely during a sustained barrage, my skin was seared down to muscle in places. My lungs were scarred by inhaled superheated air, and my body's ability to regulate temperature was destroyed beyond repair. They gave me a medal and a training assignment on this frozen moon, put me in charge of instructing new tankers on the basics of armored warfare. I don't teach Hellhound operations. I'm not cleared for that anymore, though I suspect the real reason is that they don't want me telling the candidates what actually happens to flamer crews. I stand in front of classes of young guardsmen and teach them about tactics and maintenance and communication protocols. And I feel nothing. Not pride in my service, not satisfaction in training the next generation, just the constant, inescapable heat that defines my existence. At night, in my quarters, I sit by the window and watch the snow fall outside. It's beautiful in an abstract way, white and pure and cold. I think about walking out into it, about lying down in the snow and letting it cover me, about testing whether the ice can finally extinguish the fire I carry inside. But I know it won't work. The cold can't touch me anymore. Nothing can touch me anymore except the memory of heat, the phantom sensation of fire washing over my skin, the echo of burning that will persist until my damaged heart finally gives out, and I join Ven and Petrock and all the other Hellhound crews who burned themselves to nothing in service to the Imperium. The heat never leaves you. That's what I tell myself every morning when I wake up feeling like I'm still inside Salamander 7-9, still firing the inferno cannon, still watching the world burn through my vision blocks. That's what I know with absolute certainty after 7 years of crewing a Hellhound flamer tank. The fire gets inside you, changes you, makes you into something that's neither fully human nor fully weapon but some terrible hybrid of both. And once that transformation begins, once you've felt the full heat of the promethium flames washing through the crew compartment, once you've become warm in a way that can never be reversed, you're finished. Not dead, not yet, but finished in every way that matters, hollowed out, reduced to pure function, a walking reminder of what it costs to wield the Emperor's fire, to carry his cleansing flame into the hearts of his enemies. They should tell you that at the beginning, when they assign you to a Hellhound crew, should tell you that you're not going to serve the tank, you're going to become it, merge with it, transform until there's no meaningful distinction between the metal hull and your flesh. Should tell you that the heat never leaves, never fades, never grants you a moment of relief. But they don't tell you that. They can't. Because if they did, no one would volunteer, and the Imperium needs its Hellhounds, needs weapons that can burn heresy from existence, that can purge Xeno's corruption with absolute finality, that can reduce fortifications to ash and slag. And to crew those weapons, it needs people who are willing to sacrifice not just their lives, but their humanity, who can endure transformation into living tools, who can carry fire inside themselves until it consumes everything they were. I watch my students during their classes, these young guardsmen who still have cold hands and normal body temperatures, who can still feel the difference between hot and cold, who are still fully human, and I wonder which of them will be selected for flamer duty. Which of them will climb into a Hellhound's crew compartment for the first time and feel that initial wave of heat, not knowing it's the beginning of their transformation? Which of them will stand where I'm standing in 10 years, teaching classes on a frozen world while carrying an internal furnace that never dims? I could warn them, could pull them aside and tell them the truth about what happens to Hellhound crews, but I don't, because the Imperium needs its flamers, and someone has to crew them, because the Emperor's work must be done, regardless of the cost to those who do it, because I'm still a loyal servant of the throne, even if I'm no longer fully human, and my duty extends to ensuring the next generation is ready to make the same sacrifices I made. The heat never leaves you. Remember that, when they assign you to a Hellhound, when they tell you about the honor and the glory and the important work you'll be doing, remember that the fire will get inside you, will change you, will make you into something other than what you were. And by the time you understand what's happening, by the time you realize the full scope of the transformation, it will be far too late to escape. You'll be warm, always warm, permanently, inescapably, eternally warm. And you'll spend the rest of your life, however long that is, trying to remember what cold felt like, what being fully human felt like, what it was like to exist without the constant sensation of burning. You'll fail at that remembering. Everyone does. The heat consumes those memories first, burns them away to make room for its own presence. But you'll serve. You'll endure. You'll crew your Hellhound for as long as your body can tolerate the thermal stress. And then you'll either die in combat or get reassigned somewhere cold, where you'll spend your remaining years as a monument to the Emperor's mercy, which is to say no mercy at all. Just service. Just duty. Just the endless burning that defines existence for those of us who were chosen to carry his holy fire. That's what it's like to crew a Hellhound flamer tank in combat. That's the truth they don't tell you during training, don't include in the technical manuals, don't acknowledge in the official histories. The fire never stays outside, it always gets in, always transforms you, always burns away everything except the capacity to burn others. And the worst part, the part I didn't understand until years after my last deployment, is that eventually you stop wanting it to stop. Eventually, the heat becomes comfort, becomes identity, becomes the only thing that makes sense in a universe defined by cold indifference and casual cruelty. Eventually you become grateful for the burning, because at least it's something you can feel, something that proves you still exist even if you no longer exist as human. The Emperor protects, they say, but he doesn't protect Hellhound crews. He uses them, consumes them, transforms them into weapons as surely as the promethium we carry transforms flesh into ash. And we let him, because that's what service means in the Imperium of man, giving everything, including your humanity, including your capacity to be anything except a tool of war. The heat never leaves you. Never. Remember that when you climb into your first flamer tank, when you seal the hatches and feel that initial wave of warmth. Remember that this is just the beginning. That the warmth will become heat, the heat will become burning, and the burning will become everything you are. Remember, and then proceed anyway, because you have no choice, because the Imperium needs its fire, and someone has to carry it. Someone always has to carry it. And now, after all these years, after everything the fire has taken from me, I understand that this was always my purpose. Not to live, not to be happy, not to be human, but to burn, to carry the Emperor's flame into the darkness, and let it consume me in the process. To be fuel for the fire that keeps humanity alive for one more day, one more battle, one more deployment against the forces that would see us extinct. That's what it's like. That's the truth. That's the cost. The heat never leaves you, and eventually you realize you don't want it to, because the heat is all you have left, all you are, all you'll ever be. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, being fire is perhaps the only honest existence.